This podcast is made possible by VersaPay.
Hello, it's Heather Dixon. I'm the CFO at Everside Health, and you are listening to CFO Thought Leader Podcast with Jack Swinney.
This is episode 893.
So when I thought about kind of the business priorities, first, focus on establishing the financial trajectory for a balanced growth strategy. History was more anchored towards growth, and now it needed to be balanced growth. In other words, profitable growth. So how I went about doing that is started by developing a set of what we now call our page zero metrics. And those set the course for our rule of 50 plus performance. In the software space, you'll often hear about the rule of 40 or the rule of 50. So we don't aim low, we aim for best in class. So rule of 50 plus performance. That is essentially revenue growth plus cash-based profitability margin, and basically set out a 5-year trajectory.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Julie Swinney, CFO of Zendesk. Julie Swinney had been appointed to one of Intel Corp's coveted business unit CFO positions when the general manager of Intel's data center chipset business parted ways with the company. For Swinney, who had already served in a series of senior finance roles, the GM's departure left a startling void in a business widely viewed as a key enabler for Intel's server business at large. The void prompted Swinney to raise her hand and issue what was no doubt a bold proposal for a career finance executive. In short, Swinney said, "We need a GM. I'll run that business." You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. When your accounts receivable automation focuses only on back office tasks, you forget the most important stakeholder, your customers. VersaPay gives you all the tools you need to automate those tasks, plus the collaboration tools to take on everything that automation alone simply can't. This doesn't just increase efficiencies and accelerate cash flow, but also creates a dramatically improved experience for your customers. And as the economy tightens, can you really afford to risk losing customers over an invoice-to-cash process they find frustrating? With VersaPay, clients typically achieve 50% less time managing receivables, 25% faster payments, 30% fewer past due invoices, and 81% customer portal adoption. Learn more about VersaPay's collaborative AR, ERP payments, and cash application solutions at versapay.com/CFO. Hello, we're speaking with Julie Swinney, CFO of Zendesk. Julie, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Julie, as you might know, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us. And what we're looking for as they look back during their career years is to identify those moments where they gained the experience. They feel they needed to become a leader. And we're very interested in hearing about yours. I'll tip your hand a little bit. Julie spent 25 years at Intel, coming up through the ranks there. Very interesting path, as we've learned on earlier podcasts. But Julie, we're especially interested in hearing about yours. So I'll get quiet here and ask you, take a look back for us and share those experiences.
Absolutely. Jack, as you noted, I've had the opportunity to work for two game-changing companies with that 25 years at Intel and the past year and a half at Zendesk. And when I reflect on what shaped my journey, the consistent theme is breadth of experience. And I look at that as embracing opportunity and learning that will enable you to solve complex problems, which is a lot of what finance does. Create pattern recognition, unleash new opportunities, look around those corners for those strategic opportunities, and to build those strategic key partnerships and relationships in unfamiliar environments. And that all comes from breadth. So let me hit some quick examples, if you'll bear with me, that kind of illuminate this theme. So the first example, I was sitting in my Intel office in Hillsboro, Oregon, back in the days when we actually sat in offices. And I received a call from the Asia Pacific controller asking if I would be interested in moving to Hong Kong and supporting APAC and PRC. The catch was I had 24 hours to decide, and I had never stepped foot in Asia. So I had to make this call, and I chose to say yes. And that experience not only expanded my global market understanding, but it built incredible perspective on finding commonality in the midst of differences. And that's through active listening and seeking to understand, and what a great skill set to build. It was also the first time in my career where I extended my aperture beyond what had been a career in operational finance. Think FP&A, think strategic finance functions, and it extended it to tax, treasury, and statutory accounting matters on top of all of those other things I just mentioned. And those serve you well as a CFO when you actually get that broader based experience, and you're not just reaching out to those experts, but you're kind of immersed shoulder to shoulder with them, learning those elements. So the second example I would share is, I was controller for Intel fabs. We built lots of them. I had the fabs in Arizona. And I had the opportunity to go be the CFO for a portfolio of Intel software and services startups. Not the core business, obviously. So I went from being in the kind of ROIC, innovation hub, multi-billion-dollar investment decisions to being CFO of these nascent startups. Not the obvious choice at the time, as I was told by several of my peers. But that experience turned out to be foundational to building my software as a service knowledge that set the stage for my future opportunity at Zendesk, though I didn't know it at the time. It also presented some unique opportunities to lead inorganic moves, acquisitions, divestitures, and provided a segue into my next role of scaling this upstart Intel data center business that we called the cloud. And at the time, it was not the place to be. It literally was an upstart. And it was one of those rare hockey stick forecasts that was borne out in reality. Those don't happen often, but that was one of them. And really what these experiences did, among others, was culminated in my move to Zendesk. So I had this fantastic 25-year career at Intel, and I really look at that as one company with many careers. But quite frankly, I didn't think I would leave. But ultimately, what drew me to Zendesk was the opportunity to join a customer experience market leader. I'm very customer oriented. I've always loved that engagement model. And there were three elements to really draw me over to Zendesk. The first one being a worthy mission, and that's creating value by simplifying the complexity of business. I'm a simplify the complex person, so that was right up my alley. Second, smart, talented people. Nothing better than surrounding yourself with people you can learn from and with. And third, strong values. And that included exceptional customer service, again, kind of hitting that heartbeat that I value, and then genuine care for each other and the people, again, another passion of mine. So it was an opportunity when I kind of stepped back and thought about it to kind of accelerate learning. Sometimes your learning edge, even though it's still building, it's decelerating, and this ignited it again. It was an opportunity to operate with agility and the pace of software innovation and make a difference in a new way. And that was a huge draw for me. And all of that, again, just centered on the breadth of experience over time.
Well, wonderful overview for us, Julie. Thank you for that. I do want to just circle back on a few items
Sure.
and ask you to think back to the person you may have been at that time. I do know that you have like sort of two chapters at Intel. Part you do go to law school, is that right?
I do. Non-traditional career.
What were you thinking? And again, just to clarify for the listeners, she had been with Intel 7 years, and I think she goes back for her law degree. Now she goes back to Intel as well. But what were you thinking, and what were you exploring at that time?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I had started my career with Intel, I had, spent all of my formative years thinking I was going to be an attorney. That was the game plan. And I thought I would go get some business experience because I was going to be a corporate attorney. So I would go get some valuable business experience for a couple years. And then I would go to law school. And then I joined Intel and I loved it. I loved the culture. It's a very strong culture where everyone has a voice and a point of view, no matter your level. But you can always get at the table and have a really good, engaged debate. So I was enjoying it so much. And at that 7-year mark, I decided that, hey, if I was ever going to go get this legal degree, it was going to be now, because quite frankly, I didn't think I would do it later. It happened to be in 2000, pre-crash. So I had the financial wherewithal to do it. Intel in those days was, splitting its stock quite frequently. So I had the financial capability, and I knew that it was now or never. So I chose to go pursue it. Again, in that spirit of breadth and learning. I love the learning aspect. And thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, there's a lot of commonality of, it doesn't seem like there would be, but finance and legal skills in terms of constructing arguments, thinking about a problem from multiple angles, thinking about the pros and the cons and the counters, and then how you navigate that space. So thoroughly enjoyed law school, did internships when I was in law school. And then when I graduated, I had the opportunity to come back to Intel because at that point in time, it was kind of the onset of the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation and the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. And companies were just figuring out how to even construct their programs. And I was uniquely positioned in that I understood the legal aspects of it, but I also understood the operational aspects of it. So it was kind of the perfect opportunity to blend skills and experience, not practicing, but being in the finance function, but with this legal mindset and this ability to work very closely with the attorneys to figure out the right approaches. So it was, right time, right opportunity, and getting me back to a company I truly loved.
And just about that company, what I also thought was interesting, again, you highlighted, and I think you were in Hong Kong and you're in Shanghai City
Right.
For a number of years. And for those of us who don't know Intel all that well, please don't hesitate to supply some facts that you think are generally known. First looked at your bio, I was like, okay, another Silicon Valley. Well, the fact is I don't doubt you spent a lot of time visiting the Santa Clara headquarters. But at the same time, like I think many Intel executives, your career building is in Arizona and Oregon between the two large campuses. How am I doing? Am I close? And
You're close. I only spent 1 year at headquarters in Santa Clara, and it was my last year at Intel.
so, as much as to say, aside of your Asia assignment or years abroad, you are on these two campuses where there are manufacturing facilities, I believe, nearby or right on the campuses. Do I have that right, or please explain?
Yeah, so certainly both Arizona and Oregon have a large fab presence. So Oregon, heavy development fabs, Arizona, the big, high volume manufacturing fabs. In addition to both have business units, Oregon has more of the business units. It's kind of the data center and the client hub, whereas Arizona has, the Internet of Things and the networking business. So kind of a blend of opportunities at both of those very large campuses, and they are the biggest sites for Intel.
When we get someone like yourself, you left Intel, you came back. That makes a statement. I think you thought it was something of an extraordinary place, and yes, I'll go back here and build my career. You spend then another 18 years or whatever it might have been there. What is it that sets Intel apart? And the finance track in particular, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You've spent a lot of time getting to know different peers outside of Intel. Your experience was different, perhaps, in certain ways. Can you put your finger on it? What was it really?
Well, Intel Finance is, we always call it the finance family because there really was this sense of camaraderie and common mission. Intel, again, generally has a very strong results-oriented, constructive confrontation, disagree and commit, and then optimize and get it done kind of culture. So there's a lot of kind of drumbeat to that. And if you're the finance professional, you have the opportunity to be a strong voice at the table. And I always enjoyed that from my first days as, a 22-year-old joining the company. I was at the table having these amazing conversations about where we should invest and where we should divest and what my point of view was and how we might think about that. And that's a pretty unique experience. And not only do you have that experience, then we had a conscious rotation philosophy. So, depending on your levels, it changed over time, but certainly in your early years, every 1.5 to 2 years, you're moving into a new role. So you're getting broad-based functional experience, you're getting broad-based business and manufacturing experience. And that's very hard to replicate, kind of the build that you have and how that allows you to be an excellent finance professional. Intel, I love the company, I love the culture, and the finance organization is near and dear to my heart.
Is there something you could share about how you've learned to develop talent and mentor talent from Intel? What is the legacy of having grown up in that organization?
Well, I think that at its heart, it's empowerment. So you hire great talent and then you give them the room to shine. You support them, you coach them, and certainly if it's a new task, even for a rock star, you should give them extra support and counsel, but you give them the runway to make it their own, to do it their way. And then elevate them in the process. All boats rise. And when that's happening, obviously you as a leader have the opportunity to go off and do other things and continue to kind of build that followership across a broader base where you're growing capability both in the finance organization as well as operationally. So those were some of the lessons, but give people the room to shine because they will.
I'm wondering if you would just look back for us at a moment where you were brought perhaps into a session or invited to present. Doesn't have to be to the board. This is a very big company, but to a senior management team where it was the first time really you were going to be given the floor to reveal something about it. Might have been you talked about a great deal. There was the cloud opportunity that you got attached to as it was just really young. It might have been something else. I don't know. But I'm wondering if you could just reflect a little on the first time you had to step up and present in front of senior management at Intel.
Yeah, it's that was another unique aspect that you don't see at every company is we had tremendous exposure to leadership very early in our career. So I can recall, when I was presenting, I was probably a manager. I certainly wasn't a controller yet. And I was presenting to Stacy Smith, who was our CFO at the time, on some of my ideas relative to optimizing factory startups and our other cost of sales structures and how we could do better and some innovative ideas. And I was sitting in a room with Stacy and all of the executive finance leadership team, presenting. What it turned into, and this really wasn't my vision of it, I thought it was going to be more of a presentation, and it ended up being more of this rich dialogue and debate, which, forces you to be thinking on your feet. which is a great skill to have, by the way. But it was really engaged, challenge, support, test. And again, that's kind of going to the heart of that Intel culture of that, constructive confrontation and distilling the best ideas and pressure testing them. So it was, in retrospect, fun. In the moment, it was probably highly stressful. I tried to forget that part of it, but actually, just reflecting back on what an amazing opportunity at that early juncture of my career to engage with that level of leadership in a debate about the right path forward.
We want to ask you about Zendesk, and we're about to start that. But I have one last question for you, because someone with your background and experience, as we know, the Zendesk opportunity checked all the boxes. I think you described it as an obvious place for you to step into. At the same time, we know that you were sought after earlier, or there were other opportunities that you could have left for. In fact, maybe one you seriously considered and then thought otherwise. Can you just reflect a little bit on what kept you there as long as you stayed, and why other opportunities just perhaps weren't the right fit?
And certainly over time, I had, many opportunities. It was the learning edge. While I was still, accelerating my learning through this breadth of experience, it continued to evolve even into the late stages of my career. Funny story. When I was in the cloud, I was leading the cloud and enterprise business as CFO, loved the business, loved the customer engagement. And the CFO, George Davis at the time, called me and said, I want to talk to you about a role, and you're going to tell me no, but please don't tell me no. Think about it before you say no. And he wanted me to go over and be our chief audit executive. Now, that was nowhere in my plan. Hadn't, crossed my mind. It wasn't something I thought about. But when I stepped back, this was kind of one of those learning moments where you could do something really interesting, because I thought about it not as, being a compliance function, but how do you actually turn the internal audit function into a strategic enabler for the business? How do you identify where we are, falling short strategically, operationally, and then get in there and figure out how to make it better? And so that was a huge fun element. And it was really the first time I worked very deeply and directly with the board of directors. I had worked, on the fringes of the board of directors in various presentations in the past, but, actually, getting in there and facilitating the audit committees. So that type of ongoing learning opportunity, kept me there. And I enjoyed it, and I learned from it. And then it was really just at this, kind of the last stage. I had a fantastic job. I was doing corporate planning. I had strategy. I had, our Intel Capital, finance investment arm. So lots of good, rich mix. But I didn't feel like I was learning at quite the same rate anymore. And that's when Zendesk came along, and I was like, ooh, software. I've done software, but only in small scale. Wouldn't this be interesting? And that was kind of that pivotal moment of, okay, I'm going to lean into new opportunity. And
you're also in Silicon Valley finally, which is interesting. After all that time in tech, after 25 years, you arrived there.
Exactly.
So let's find out about Zendesk. Tell us about this company. What does it do? What are its offerings? What sets it apart?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I wouldn't have left for anything but a tremendous opportunity. I spoke about the draw of Zendesk as, customer experience market leader. Absolutely true. Disruptive, innovative. But to give you some perspective, so, Zendesk powers customer experiences of some of the most transformative companies out there. So if you are a customer of companies like a Shopify or an Instacart, Stanley Black & Decker, or Four Seasons, you're actually a Zendesk customer as well. You may not know that, but we're powering those customer experiences. And to frame that scale, we have nearly 1 million customer service agents globally using Zendesk. That's with like 4 billion tickets per year. So massive scale. But what sets us apart and what really drew me was it's a unique combination because it's powerful solutions, powerful platforms, yet so easy to use. And it's personalized with those digital service experiences. And one of my favorites as a CFO is just an excellent ROI. Lower total cost of ownership, fast time to value, speed, agility, scalability. And those are really unique because it's not easy to have that combination of powerful, easy, wonderful ROI. And Zendesk really has that in spades.
So this is quite a sizable company today. Its early stages are behind it. We're wondering, what is the chapter that you saw that you can open for this company as a finance leader, as an important leader in the company? What is the chapter you can, and we're wondering, what does it mean for your finance function? What might you add or take away or do differently? Don't know, but tell us about the chapter that you arrive in and what the future looks like for where you're headed.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll start and talk about this at the company level, and then I can, dive into the finance function elements of it. So when I joined the company, I was the senior vice president of finance and strategy. So think about that as corporate planning, your embedded FP&A across all of the business functions, procurement, real estate. So I had some operational functions as well. And so, when I became the interim CFO and ultimately the CFO, I had the benefit of building on existing relationships with the executive leadership team. And that's fortunate because we, like others in tech, were feeling the effects of those macroeconomic headwinds. So when I thought about kind of the business priorities, first, focus on establishing the financial trajectory for a balanced growth strategy. History was more anchored towards growth, and now it needed to be balanced growth. In other words, profitable growth. So how I went about doing that is started by developing a set of what we now call our page 0 metrics. And those set the course for our rule of 50 plus performance. In the software space, you'll often hear about the rule of 40 or the rule of 50. So, we don't aim low, we aim for best in class. So rule of 50 plus performance. And for those not familiar with that, that is essentially revenue growth plus cash-based profitability margin. So we looked at those metrics, and then other key metrics included our bookings, our gross and net retention, our gross margin, and our productivity metrics for all of our functions, and basically set out a 5-year trajectory that became our ambitions that align to our strategy. So that was kind of step 1. And then step 2 is, once you have those metrics, how do you proliferate them and do so in a way that creates really deep business literacy? And I'm using business literacy as opposed to financial literacy intentionally, because when I think about business literacy, it's an all play. Everyone in the company needs to understand these key metrics and that they are fundamental to our broad-based business success. So to build that business literacy, because it doesn't always naturally occur, everyone's an expert in their domain. So you want to create this common frame. So started with the top 250 leaders in the company, and then cascaded that to the full company, and did the cascade via town halls, leader Q&As, and we're doing quarterly report outs on progress, again, as a way to reinforce that this is all play, and we want everyone leaning in to make this trajectory a reality. And then kind of the third element is we went private last November. And as we went from public to private, we now had the opportunity to take a bit of a longer term growth lens and invest in transformation. And, looking at transformation, innovation, spanning capabilities and system infrastructure, system tools, capabilities, processes, everything you might expect for a company that grew up fast and now has the opportunity to have large scale growth. And finance is really front and center and leading and supporting these initiatives. So I get directly involved. My teams get directly involved at all levels of the organization. So from a business standpoint, kind of those were kind of the top three priorities. And really, they are still the top three priorities because they are wheels in motion.
Wanted to ask you about building business literacy and just the types of metrics that you might rely on to build business literacy. Perhaps they're different than what we see on a financial statement. Are many of the metrics you're helping build that literacy with non-financial metrics, or what would you tell us?
It's a combination of both. So, certainly I do want our employees to understand what we mean when we say annual recurring revenue, because that's so foundational to a software business. So I want them to understand what that means. And I want them to understand bookings, and I want them to understand, how we generate cash, and why margin matters. So we do anchor on some of the business fundamentals. We don't get caught up in the nomenclature of finance, right? We talk about the principles and why they matter. The exact nomenclature is not important. What we also do, to your point, though, is we round that out with non-financial metrics focus as well. So think about customers, people, and products. So things like NPS, things like employee engagement and employee retention, particularly in, think about the days of the pandemic when, attrition was at all-time highs. How do you make sure you're retaining your key talent? And then on the product side, metrics like utilization. Do we understand our usage profiles across our products, across our industries, how we're panning out in trials, how we're thinking about pipeline stage conversion? So all of those things matter. We go to different levels with different audiences, but, getting everyone on at least, kind of the 100,000 foot level baseline relative to some of those key metrics is important.
Now, as a private company, are there certain metrics that you might find more useful now when it comes to educating the organization, or you might share more widely now as a private company?
Well, it's, cash is always important, public or private, but certainly in the private domain, there's heavier emphasis on metrics that, translate P&L back to cash. So for instance, let me give you an example. We would amortize commissions, over, customer life cycles. When you're a public company, you really care about the cash going out, or when you're a private company, you really care about that cash going out the door. So we turn that back into what are actually the cash commissions being paid, right? Great. We'll look at it on a P&L basis with that amortization, but we also want to understand the underlying cash trends. And that goes again back to that kind of rule of 50 plus. We look at that by looking at cash-based profitability. So we make adjustments to take it back to cash. And that is a difference between the public and private domain is, again, both care, but a lot of the metrics in the private domain are cash-based metrics.
So if I was to ask, which metrics have you brought to the forefront or you're emphasizing more across the organization? One would think it's about cash at this place in time. In the last 12 months, those are the metrics that have come to the forefront, or would you look at the world differently?
No, I would look at the world through that same lens that you're hearing from my fellow CFOs. Cash has, again, always been important, but is more dialed up in contrast and focus right now. And that will remain true. So yes, we look again at, that cash-based profitability. We look at our guiding star of that, getting to that rule of 50 plus and, advancing our trajectory with balanced growth. So those are front and center in how we look at the business, not only on an annual basis, but quarterly increments, and our 5-year long range plan.
I want to ask you about talent. You touched on it briefly there with us during the pandemic, how churn was a concern everywhere. And it's a different environment now, as we well know. But I'm wondering, as a finance leader and stepping into this, to a CFO role now, where are you looking at talent maybe differently? And again, coming from this large enterprise environment, breadth of different opportunities that you could be rotated into and learn from, as you described for us, that learning sort of culture, how that can be achieved in a company this size, where the breadth of opportunity just can't be the size of what it is in Intel. As you look to understand better sort of that talent equation, how do you hold on to the people that are really delivering for you? How do you bring forth opportunities for them? Is finance there, or is that really an HR question today, or do you find yourself participating?
Oh, absolutely. Participating both for the finance function as well as the business at large. And when I think about, we think about performance and potential, right? And performance being results, not activities. I like to emphasize that with everyone, finance and beyond. And I think about the performance of the finance function and, beyond productivity benchmarks, the typical FTEs per, billion of revenue or percent of revenue investment. We look at areas like influence as manifested in cash max and cash savings activities, process innovation, time savings, risk management. I look to the leadership behaviors, living to the values, and importantly, thinking and acting like an owner. And yes, rotation. So can we rotate through the breadth of the business groups of a company of Intel size and scale at 100,000 plus employees? Of course not. But can we do project-based rotations where we give people unique opportunities, for instance, to get exposure to hot areas like treasury? It's a big topic these days. Can we give people opportunities to lead these transformation initiatives I described, even beyond their domain? They may be, for instance, in a revenue role, and we put them on a role that's targeted at global talent. So very different kinds of opportunities, and being intentional about putting our best people in spots that stretch them, that develop them. And I do encourage rotation, even at the most senior levels amongst my vice presidents. I want them to continue to explore new avenues and stretch their skills because they're the bench for the future CFO succession. So looking at those opportunities, again, you just have to be more thoughtful and intentional because they're not necessarily going to be role-based, but project opportunities abound, and really being intentional about putting people in those spots to stretch them, grow them, support them, and develop them.
Just thank you for that. Wanted to understand better, as this company went private, whether the finance organization, how did it change in certain ways? I mean, perhaps you dedicated people in a different no longer did you need all these resources. You could use them differently. I don't know, or maybe it's more the same than we would ever imagine. But from your perspective, what's the change really from a finance function point of view and how you use your people?
Well, a lot of it is the same. So you can imagine that the drumbeat of the business. So those embedded FP&A and strategic analysts, they're still needed because we are driving the business forward to scale and grow profitably. So we need that perspective. We need that voice at the table. So that continues. Some of the accounting functions change. We're not filing 10Qs and 10Ks. On the other hand, we're more engaged in treasury and cash management and debt management in a way that we didn't have as a public company. So new and different experiences for our accounting organization. So it's the other thing that we see is, private companies, as you might expect, spend a lot of time focused on unit economics, appropriately so. And that gives us an opportunity really to learn more about the ways to look at those economics across not only our own business at a different level of granularity, but also compare across the portfolio companies. And there's immense learning and sharing and best practice evolution and revolution that occurs with that. So we spend now a lot more time reaching out, networking, and we are highly, highly collaborative with our sponsors. Premier, Hellman and Friedman, they're fantastic. They are long-term growth minded, and their design is to be highly collaborative, outside in insights, And we exercise that together. And it really is, an engaged process. It's not a situation where we get to the end of the road and we present out our results. It's iterative. We go together, and we are better and stronger because of that. So that's a different tenor, and again, a lot more metrics focused, a lot more broad networking focus outside the company, all of which I think enrich the finance professional experience.
Is for some reason has the collaborative environment been enhanced as a private company?
Certainly the dynamic is different when you're dealing with kind of a contained set of investors. That gives you the opportunity for much deeper collaboration. We always had collaboration, of course. We had a fantastic board. We continue to have a fantastic but different board. But yes, the level of collaboration is much more extensive. Again, not only with the sponsors, i.e. our investors, but also with the CFOs across the portfolio companies. We just got together recently in Miami, and we were sharing best practices, talking about how we're, evolving our digital practices, how we're dealing with the recent banking turmoil. And again, that's just a level of outside-in collaboration that doesn't naturally occur in a public company environment. You can create it, but it doesn't naturally occur.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're now up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And again, this might have happened anytime during the course of your career. It was a period where you had lines of sight into the organization and you saw something, a risk, an opportunity, and you responded to it. At least that's how we ask the question. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
So when I was a business unit CFO, one of my times I was a business unit CFO at Intel, we had the general manager of our data center chipset business leave the company. And that left a leadership void for a very important business in and of itself, but also an enabler of the broader business because chipsets were essential to servers. So I went to my business partner at the time and said, we absolutely need a GM. We don't have one, and I want to step in and run this business. And it was a tremendous learning experience to run a P&L as the GM. With the gravity, you don't always appreciate the gravity of responsibility of that, from sales to supply chain management to the foundation of the business, which is always people and culture. And to be clear, in this process, I wasn't operating as both the GM and the CFO. I elevated one of my finance leaders to be my CFO, and with the expectation that they would operate as a CFO and challenge me, because that productive business partner tension and constructive debate at Intel, sometimes called constructive confrontation, is absolutely essential to inform decision making. And ultimately, what that experience cemented for me was an enterprise mindset, the firm over the function. It was important that I step into a different role because that is what the company needed of me at that particular point in time. And how I describe this to my team is, we are not in the press box to report the plays on the field. We are not in the stands to cheer on or critique our partners. We must be on the field every day, creating and capturing value for our customers, our people, and our investors. And therefore, we may need to play different roles at different points in time. And I like to say, we are all sales. We are all company advocates. At the end of the day, we are all Zendesk, and it is our responsibility to maximize value for the company at large in whatever capacity is needed. So that really was kind of this aha moment for me of, the importance of that enterprise thinking and that agility to step into leadership where it's needed most and round yourself out. It was a fantastic learning journey for me. So I got a lot out of it. But it's showing that flexibility and that, anchoring on, if you're thinking like an owner, what do you need to do? And that's what you do.
Hello and welcome to 60 Second Stories from CFO Thought Leader. It was the type of CFO position Gary Zyla tells us he believed was beyond his reach. That's not to say Zyla's resume didn't have some solid CFO prerequisites. However, the leadership challenge Zyla was about to take on was broader than traditional finance or accounting leadership positions. It would be incumbent on Zyla to help run the business day to day. In 2011, Zyla was named CFO of his company's newly formed California-based subsidiary. A dozen years, 2 private equity transactions, 1 IPO, and 6 acquisitions later, we would imagine few CFO opportunities are any longer beyond Zyla's reach. We'll hear that story and much more on episode 877 of CFO Thought Leader, featuring CFO Gary Zyla of AssetMark. Remember, the future of finance is listening.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. This first question, you may take some license with. Usually, as you first step into a CFO role, we ask about that first 30 days. And if you could give yourself some advice, if you could go back in time as you were starting. And this is such an interesting chapter for you. It must be, given, again, as we've discovered your time at Intel, how lengthy it was, the different roles you seem to have stepped into there, one after another. And finally, you're stepping into a CFO role. It was time, as you described for us nicely. But what, we're real curious. What is it that maybe you're surprised by? What is it that maybe you didn't expect? I don't know, but again, our question ordinarily is if you could go back in time and just whisper something in your ear as you were beginning this role, which for you wasn't all that long ago, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I would just remind myself of honestly what I already know, which is, I often get this question is, what is the critical skill for finance? And my answer is always intellectual curiosity. Because intellectual curiosity is the spark that ignites innovation. And when you're the CFO, you need to be looking for those opportunities to ignite that innovation in yourself, in your teams, and in your partners. And that really means leaning into learning, looking inside the company, looking outside the company walls, competitive market intelligence. And then you deploy that learning back to connect that strategy all the way to execution, again, with that enterprise level mindset, because you're not there for your function, you're there for the company at large, and you're on the field every single day. So really just anchoring back to the opportunity statement. And, it was a whirlwind, stepping in, going public to private, becoming the interim and then the CFO in the midst of all of this macroeconomic change. But again, just never losing sight of that curiosity and that opportunity to innovate.
Julie, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. We're trying to discover whether you have a personal habit or part of a routine that you're known for. This is something people point out. Julie's always done that. We're not sure why, but that's just Julie. I don't know. Anything come to mind when we ask for a personal habit or routine? And it might be outside the office. It might be something a family member would point out to us. I don't know.
Well, one of the things that, I'm known for is I'm an avid reader. Again, you probably heard a theme of I love learning in all its facets and forms. So I aspire, but I admit I'm falling short right now to read a book every week that again just incites thinking. In fact, earlier this week we did a Zendesk book club on Jim Collins' Good to Great. And talked a lot about level 5 leadership and, what it meant to, have discipline, people, thought, and action. And that for me is really fun. I love, again, just translating all of my reflections on what I read into, opportunities for the business and most importantly for our people.
Can we put you on the spot for a book selection? You mentioned Jim Collins. Now, that's a 20-year-old book.
I know, but it's still a good one.
Frequently recommended here. In fact, we banned it at one point. There's a reason finance leaders gravitate to that book. Why is it? It's not a finance book, clearly. It's a culture book. Or how would you, why is it? What draws them
Well,
to that book?
Well, I do think this level 5 leadership. You see it in different leadership books called different things, right?
Yeah.
But there is that aspect of having the humility and to learn, that growth mindset, but at the same time that will to persevere. And I think we find that in finance professionals, right? Because these aren't easy jobs, right? You're often in constructive confrontation. So just reminding yourself of that opportunity, I think, is a piece of it. And then there's an element of the discipline that certainly appeals to me from my Intel career history, building into my current Zendesk trajectory. I do love disciplined approaches. That's not to say, you don't go freeform and innovate, but you do so kind of in a disciplined way that allows you to make those leaps with information in hand. So I think it's that really continues to have the longevity of a book over, as you said, 20 plus years, because the principles remain.
You said there's a book club. Is that right? Is that a cultural something started recently, or does that go back? Or
that's a Zendesk. One of the we have many employee resources, and book club is one of them. And they asked me to recommend a book, and guess what I recommended? The one I just described, even though it's old school, because I thought it was very relevant to the transformation we're driving today.
I want to just put you on the spot because you were at Intel when I think Only the Paranoid Survive came out, Andy Grove's
book, yes.
And again, it's a frequently recommended book on this podcast. There's something that resonates specifically with finance people, clearly, in my mind.
Andy's such a luminary, and I had the benefit of being with the company when he was still at the helm. Not that I worked directly with him, but, being the beneficiary of seeing him speak and learn from him. He had such amazing strategic insight, just incredible focus, incredible discipline, a lot to learn from. One of the things that stood out to me was that, Only the Paranoid Survive, looking for those inflection points before you start to spiral down. Those have made a difference across my career. I was with Intel when the sub $1,000 PC became a thing. And that was one of those inflection points that, at the time we just, no one thought it was going to come. And yet there it was. So I think, being cognizant again of that outside in, those market dynamics, reaching out beyond your traditional network to make sure you have the right signaling functions and you can see the patterns and the trends coming at you is incredibly important and has continued to thread how I look, again, outside in as part and parcel of how I operate as a leader.
Well, finally, we're up to our last question where we get to ask you to look forward for us. And we'd like to know what your priorities are as CFO of Zendesk over the next 12 months, not 5 years, but 12 months. What are your priorities as CFO of Zendesk?
Well, I think it goes back to what I articulated, which is we are on this profitable growth journey, and we're accelerating to make that happen. So making sure that we lead the course, that we do so, again, going back to kind of lessons from Andy, with tremendous focus and prioritization and trade-off mentality will be an important part of my job. And then, again, enlisting, exciting, motivating the finance organization and also the broader organization with the opportunity that lies ahead. We all know that the tech sector is, still in rough waters, industry in general in rough waters, but tech particularly so. So it's not an easy path. There are bumps along the way. but helping everyone see the opportunity that lies ahead and that it's within our grasp, and the actions that we need to take to get on that trajectory that we need to achieve. So that's really core focus for us. And we're going to do it by working with our customers and making sure we're, again, creating that value for them and that innovation engine for them that causes them to always choose Zendesk.
Julie Swinney, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Well, thank you, Jack. It was a pleasure.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.